All right, we have talked about conference realignment from every single possible angle. And this morning, I think a lot of you probably got freaked out or worried. I got several texts. We got several messages in the Discord. I got tagged all over Twitter about people freaking out about a Brett McMurphy tweet. And I understand where Florida State fans are, and I understand where they've been since about November timeframe. It seems like everything since really the Jordan Travis injury has gone against the Noles. Now, there have been pockets of good news in there. We've had some big recruiting wins. There was a big win against a rival. You won an ACC championship, and you've had some nice moments. Suing the ACC, probably maybe better than any of them, but there's been a lot of negative that's happened against FSU, and a lot of it stems from the snub and wanting to get out of this conference. But I think there are two groups of FSU fans right now. There are the fans that are freaked out about every single little piece of news that comes out, whether it be a Greg Swaim tweet, whether it be a Ross Dellinger interview, whether it be a Jason Scheer tweet from the other day, or whether it be a Brett McMurphy tweet. No matter what happens, any kind of news, anything that happens around realignment, you are going to melt down and freak out because of how things have gone for FSU over the last 6-8 months. And I understand that. I'm not even blaming you. I'm just saying I know that that's one camp. There's another camp that, very much like politics in this country, their heels are so dug in to believing that Florida State and Clemson, honestly, are going to the Big Ten, that they are not shaken by any news that comes out from Brett McMurphy or Ross Dellinger or anyone. Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti could come out and tell that group of people Florida State will never be in our conference, and they'd still say they're wrong. I don't believe it. They'll be there. I'd say I probably lean a little closer to that group, that heels dug in. McMurphy's tweet doesn't bother me. Jason Scheer's tweet doesn't bother me. I think Florida State's going to the Power too. But I would be remiss if I told you that when I saw McMurphy's tweet and when 17 people sent it to me, I wasn't a little bit surprised to see it and hear it play out. Now, we've spent the day talking with people. We've tried to be calculated. I didn't just get on here immediately and do a reaction to it and do things emotionally like I do at times, which there's a time and place for. There's nothing wrong with it, but tried to be somewhat methodical with how we approached the tweet and what we think it means, what we think he's saying, what we think some of the reasons might be. I want to talk to you about those today. McMurphy tweeted, the Big Ten and the SEC are unlikely to add Florida State if it leaves the ACC and the ACC survives, sources told Action Network HQ. The Big Ten and the SEC don't want FSU because adding Florida State doesn't make financial sense. There's no desire to expand, and they've been a disruptive partner, sources said. We'll break all of that down. Buddy, if you're watching, listen, no ad in today's video. All I'm going to ask you to do is hit the subscribe button for me. You come here for realignment news. You come here for video game streaming. You come here for recruiting updates, whatever it is, just hit that subscribe button for us. It's all we ask. Why might he have said this? Why might some of these Big Ten and SEC sources told Brett McMurphy this? I spoke with several people today, and I think the number one reason is probably due to legal reasons. I think there's a really good chance, and I spoke with an attorney that maybe some of you are familiar with about this, and then I followed up with another attorney and got the same answer. I think there's a really good chance that when Florida State and Clemson leave, and if the Big 12 grabs more teams like NC State and Louisville and Virginia Tech, NC State, Pitt, those types of teams, I think there's a good chance that the ACC craters. And when they crater, I do think that they're going to try and sue anyone and everyone they can, including the conferences that those teams end up in. And why would they do that? Well, first, I think they're going to try and prove that there was nefarious action going on. There was, they were on a no contact list and you reached out to them, right? You were tampering with them is another college football word. But also, I think they're going to need to sue them. I think that's their only recourse for revenue when everyone leaves them in the dust. And I think those big two conferences need to be able to prove like, no. Our stance was always that we weren't adding. Our stance was always that we weren't trying to get them to the Big Ten. Our stance was always that we weren't trying to pull them to the SEC. Our stance was we are not looking to add. Florida State's not on the market. Why would we be looking to add them? Now, Florida State becomes available. Florida State's on the market, then sure, we would go after them. It's like flirting with your buddy's spouse that they're breaking up. Well, there's no reason to do that while they're breaking up. You wait until they're already broken up. and then there's no issues. It's the same thing here. Florida State and one of these big two, probably both these big two, have feelings for each other, but when you're entrenched in a marriage, maybe it doesn't make as much sense for the other party to reach out, even if things are rocky, while that marriage is still together. Same thing here. Same exact situation here with the Big Ten and the SEC. I think legal reasons are big. I think number two, it's a big-time negotiating play. I think it's a negotiating play on the SEC and the Big Ten's part. If the messaging and the constant communication continues to be, we don't really want you, does Florida State maybe get desperate? Does Florida State take less money to join one of those conferences? Does Florida State maybe get in a position where they'll jump into a deal that's maybe not the best for them? Maybe they take a reduced rate or reduced share. Maybe they don't need a bonus to join, a signing bonus or anything like that. Maybe that's the situation because they're negotiators. This is business. But they're also negotiating against each other. I think there's very much a play here where if the SEC can downplay their interest and the Big Ten can downplay their interest, then the other side thinks, well, maybe it won't be so hard to get them after all. This idea that Fox or ESPN would not be looking for a couple of teams like Florida State and Clemson, though Clemson not mentioned in the tweet, is ludicrous, and it's funny to hear. I thought it was interesting that Clemson was left out of McMurphy's tweet, but I do think there's negotiation going on. Number three, it literally could be the truth. It could be the truth that the SEC and the Big Ten have no interest in Florida State. And if it is the truth that the SEC and Big Ten have no interest in Florida State, it is only the truth right now. And I think it goes back to the legal reasons. Why would they have interest in Florida State? Florida State is currently in another conference. There is nothing that the SEC or Big Ten could do to get Florida State out of their conference. Outside of paying several $100 million to settle, I don't think there's anything they could do. So why would they say anything other than that? I think it might actually be the truth. Now, do I think it's the long-term truth? Do I think if Florida State and Clemson were out tomorrow and they announced a settlement, that they wouldn't get picked up by one of these two programs? No. I don't think that's the case. One of these two conferences. This could also very much just be what certain parties want people to hear. I think Brett McMurphy does a phenomenal job. I think he's very well connected. I've been in rooms with him several times. He's usually there in Tampa when we do the coaches tour. I'm sure he'll be at ACC Media Days. I've seen him around. We may even get him on the channel. What I will tell you, though, is that there are certain people in the media, and I think Brett's one of them. I don't mean this in a anti-Brett way, but I think there are certain people in the media who understand that they're going to report on what sources say, even if they don't agree with what those sources are saying. And there certainly could be situations where people could be reaching out to Brett, and those people themselves don't even believe what they're telling him, let alone Brett believing what they're telling him, and he still puts it out because it's still technically what he was told. I think certain parties could want certain narratives crafted to benefit them. I think we talked about how the Big 12 stuff leaking could certainly benefit Florida State in some situations. It could benefit the Big 12 in certain situations, and there's some ways that this leaking could benefit the Big 10 and the SEC. But you remember what happened last year with the Big 10, Oregon and Washington, there was no interest there. And I know we'll get comments that say, well, but what was different about Oregon and Washington? Yes, these are not identical situations. What I'm telling you, though, is that the same exact thing was said. We have no interest in these teams. We are not looking to expand. We're done with realignment. We're good with where we're at. And what happened right after that? Boom, they were added. Almost in the midnight hour, right? Like the wee morning hours, they were added. And so I know the situations are different. I know there are different things about accreditation. I know there's a lot there. I'm just trying to point the similarity out of the reporting that was done around it. I thought it was interesting to hear him call Florida State disruptors. Something I certainly want to ask Jim Phillips about next week at ACC Kickoff. Do you feel like Florida State has been a disruptor? Now, have they made things uncomfortable? Have they made things awkward? Has it been a little bit difficult? Well, we had Michael Alford on, and he told me that he had a great relationship with Jim Phillips. Michael Alford told me that to my face here on this channel. He told thousands of you that to your faces on this channel. I think Jim Phillips would say the same thing. Hey, we haven't treated any of Florida State's athletes or coaches any differently. Are we frustrated with what they're doing? Absolutely. But we still have a good working relationship. We're still having, what did we win? 5 conference championships last year? What do we have? 6 coaches of the year, 5 of those being in the ACC? How many players of the year did Florida State have? And so I think that the idea that Florida State is a disruptor is interesting, especially when you consider what Texas just did. I was on with John Kurtz earlier. If you haven't seen his YouTube channel, you should certainly go check it out. But I was on with John Kurtz earlier, and he interviewed me. And we talked about how Texas was the ultimate disruptor. You think teams hate the Seminoles right now. You think ACC teams hate the Noles. The Big 12 teams will forever hate Texas for the way that things went down with them. Disruptors is a funny word. This entire sport is full of disruptors. What has Florida State done to disrupt? Tried to get out of a conference? Sued the ACC after the ACC sued them? What have they done to be a disruptor? There's a lot of questions around a reduced share. Would Florida State take less in the Big Ten or the SEC? I have always been of the opinion that Florida State would not be taking a reduced share, that they would get the full share in any conference they joined. If I'm wrong on that, we'll certainly eat the crow. What has been represented to me is that that is not going to be the case, that Florida State will get a full share wherever they land. Would you go to the Big Ten for a 75% share for 2 years and then jump up to 100%? Absolutely, you would. That's still way more money than you would be making otherwise. Would you go to the SEC for 50% for 3 years and then be making 100%? Absolutely. That's still be more money than you were making in the ACC. So why not? Why wouldn't you do it? What about the Big 12? Is the Big 12 a viable landing spot? We saw the Jason Shear stuff. I did a video on it on College Football Addiction, our national channel. And I'd love if you go check that out. I'll link it at the end of the video. But so many people have asked me, and the question that gets asked over and over and over again is, well, where are we going to land? And I am still confident. My heels are dug in that Florida State lands in the Power 2, in the Big 2. I don't think they land in the Big 12. I don't necessarily think they go independent. Maybe that's a short stint type thing. There's a lot of questions that would come with that, if that's feasible, if that's possible. What are their rights really worth? But could they land in the Big 10 or SEC within the next 3 or 4 years? I think it happens within 2 years. I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. I think it gets the loudest before the battle's over. And I think Florida State is ultimately going to land there. I've said this on many channels, many videos. If Florida State and Clemson, who kind of skated through this morning's news or tweet session, if Florida State and Clemson did all of this and they land in the Big 12 in a conference that is making them marginally more money, but after paying hundreds of millions of dollars to get out of the ACC, it will have been a complete failure on Florida State and Clemson's administration. In that situation, they should have just stayed in the ACC. Now, if there's a situation where they overplayed their hand, if there's a situation where they didn't calculate all risks, if there's a situation where they took a risk and came out on the wrong side of it, I understand things happen. I don't think that's the case. I don't think Florida State would do all of this without having an assurance that they'd be landing in the Power 2. But if it gets there, outside of the Big 12 paying Florida State and Clemson just astronomical amounts of money to come there, I believe that would likely constitute a failure on the administration's part for both schools. You can disagree with that. You can agree with it. It doesn't really matter to me. That's my thoughts on it. I think that would not have been a wise decision by the leadership. But why is there so much Big 12 smoke? Why is there so much Big 12 news around Florida State right now? I broke all that down on our national channel, College Football Addiction. And if you haven't seen that video, you can click the screen right now to watch it.